Frontier trader George Crowan has been dispatched on a crucial mission to broker a peace treaty between the British Crown and the warring tribes of the Ohio Valley. But Crowan is unaware he's in the sights of a group of rogue warriors who have anything but peace on their mind. Now, Crowan may become another casualty of the war he's trying to end. George Crowan comes to North America from Ireland, seeking his fortune, and he becomes one of the most influential men on the early American frontier.
He's a man on the make. He's always looking for the next opportunity, and he goes where those opportunities take him.
On the frontier, fortune favors the bold. The further you go, the places that aren't on the map, in Crowan's mind, the more opportunity there is for trade and, most importantly, profit.
Crowan was out there talking to the American Indians in a way that few of his contemporaries were. He took the time to learn American Indian languages, learn their customs, and he proved time and time again this was a man whose word was good.
George Crowan was one of the first Anglo fur traders to go over the Ohio River Valley. The region was long dominated by the French.
Britain and France both covet the land and resources of the Ohio Valley, and as they fight for control of the region, the native tribes have to choose a side.
The Indians were not one monolithic group, all of the same opinion and all of the same mind, which is why as the different groups decided whether it was the British or the French that would give them the better chance of obtaining their goals, they didn't all decide on the same thing.
As a trader, George Crowan has the influence to sway the natives toward the British.
Now, here's the way I do business. I've got a fair rate of exchange. 6 raccoon pelts or 4 fox pelts will get you 12 shirts or 8 warm blankets.
Crowan is even willing to push the limits of good business, if that's what it takes to make a deal.
Oh, man knows what he wants. English gunpowder. A frowned upon item for some traders, but not for George Crowan.
Many traders, especially British traders, are reluctant to trade guns and ammunition with American Indians for fear that those weapons would be used against them. But Crowan has no such qualms.
As Crowan's business grows, French traders long established in the area see him as unwanted competition.
If you and your Ottawa friends wouldn't mind waiting while I finish my business here.
You have no business on French land.
This here's open territory.
Trade on the frontier can quickly turn violent. Crowan is both careful and clever.
Yeah. My friend's a chief of the Seneca, you see. His warriors were given him privacy to conduct business. Well, a little privacy is always appreciated. Now then, 6 pints of fine English gunpowder. You just assure me it will only be used for hunting or against the French, and we can get down to business.
He always tried to diffuse tensions between native groups. Tensions and open warfare were bad for his trade business.
But Crowan can't avoid warfare forever, as the competition between Britain and France for control of the Ohio Valley explodes into the French and Indian War. Crowan's rapport with the indigenous peoples will be crucial for negotiating and winning allies. So he joins a military expedition against the French, led by General Edward Braddock.
General Braddock, lovely day, sir. Aye, well, he's a busy man.
I think first and foremost, George Crowan was a businessman. He may have felt a little bit of loyalty to the crown, but not out of patriotism as much as the fact that empire goes hand in hand with trade.
Braddock has arrived from England with a formidable military force. Their target is the French Fort Duquesne.
Fort Duquesne was positioned on the confluence of the Ohio and the Allegheny rivers. If you could take that, you could control a lot of movement logistically.
One of Braddock's guides is legendary frontiersman Christopher Gist.
Ah, Christopher, the beauty of it. This year, the general clears a fine wide road, and next year, it'll be lined with settlers and trading posts.
Nice to have the army do your work for you.
Like many, Crowan is optimistic about Braddock's prospects. Not only will Braddock get rid of the French, he'll also open up a valuable trade route into the interior of the continent.
Crowan finds a dead scout, a sure sign that the French and their native allies have learned of Braddock's mission.
They know we're coming.
I'll scout ahead. You get word to Braddock.
He quickly warns Braddock's 23-year-old aide, George Washington.
Washington and Crowan were very different types of people. Crowan was moving between worlds. He was an intermediary, not a gentleman.
Colonel Washington, Gist and me found one of the forward scouts with an arrow in his back. Best tell the general.
I'm well aware of my responsibilities, Mr. Crowan.
George Crowan didn't comport himself in a way that someone from George Washington's social class would have respected or admired.
Take it as a suggestion, and a good one. If the general's officers had had more respect for the Iroquois I brought, they might have scouted ahead and prevented this, instead of packing up and going home.
Braddock got very close to his objective and they came head to head with the Indian allies of the French.
They were ambushed by 700 Great Lakes warriors.
Column was getting jammed up and completely attacked. These folks were now sitting ducks.
Did you see them, Crowan?
Can't see anything.
Of the close to 1,500 men that Braddock brings into the battle, over 1,000 are killed or wounded.
Braddock himself was finally wounded. And Washington, with the assistance of George Crowan, managed to bundle the wounded Braddock into a cart so they could get him away from this scene of carnage.
Oh, easy now, General. If you're going to die in the field of battle, let's leave that to the enemy, shall we?
Braddock, in a sense of shame that he personally was responsible, he reached out for Crowan's pistols so that he could put an end to his own life, in the same way that a defeated Roman general would have fallen on his sword.
We have to retreat.
Let's hope we live long enough.
George Crowan went into battle hoping for a profitable victory. Now, he's just trying to survive a bloody defeat. After General Braddock's expedition suffers a vicious assault by French and Indian forces, frontier trader George Crowan and 23-year-old Colonel George Washington are left without a commander.
General, looks like the commander's fallen to you, Colonel.
It's now up to Washington to take charge and lead a retreat to save what's left of Braddock's army.
The Battle of the Monongahela stands as one of the greatest military defeats in the history of the British Empire. But Braddock's big downfall was that he didn't respect the frontier. He looked at the native peoples in the region as someone to be brought to heel, and it cost him his life.
Braddock's defeat is a great victory for the native tribes who sided with the French, and one great warrior will seize this opportunity. The man who stands to gain most from Braddock's defeat is the war chief Oboindiac, or as the French call him, Pontiac.
Pontiac was a war chief of the Ottawa, who is most famous today for having instigated what at the time was the largest united uprising of American Indians against Europeans.
Braddock's defeat would have reassured Pontiac that the French were the imperial entity that Native Americans should align with.
Days later, Braddock's retreating forces stop to bury their slain general. Despite the calamity of Braddock's defeat, the British pour new men and supplies into the French and Indian War, a conflict in which both Pontiac and George Crowan play key roles.
Crowan had been spreading all these lies and rumors about the French, all in an attempt to get Ohio Indians to renounce their allegiance to the French. And Pontiac made a speech in which he berated George Crowan as a liar.
My French brothers, the man called Crowan has spread lies. He says the English have taken Canada. But I tell you the truth. Canada is unconquered. Crowan is a liar, and the French shall be victorious.
But Pontiac has chosen the wrong allies. In 1763, the war ends with a British victory at the site of General Braddock's notorious defeat. But while George Crowan looks forward to the resumption of trade across the frontier, Pontiac wants to take the war to another level.
My brothers, when I have asked the English for medicine for our sick, they laugh at me. And you, my brothers, the time has come to exterminate this nation which only seeks to destroy us.
Pontiac! 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 Pontiac!
The Pontiac Uprising was the first widespread, united uprising of American Indian peoples against colonial powers, stemming the tide of westward migration. The action needed was mass, unified, armed resistance.
Adopting European-style maneuvers, Pontiac's forces lay siege to a dozen British forts. But the British strike back with attacks of their own.
The British are able to launch a successful offensive. In early 1765, the war itself had almost fallen into a standoff.
Hoping to avoid further bloodshed in a war that could drag on for years, the British decide to negotiate a series of peace treaties with the warring tribes.
Negotiation was not the last resort for the British, but it was close to it.
There's only one person with the experience and skills to do it, and that's George Crone.
Crowen's plan is to first make peace among the tribes of the Ohio Valley, then continue west to find Pontiac and negotiate with him.
If Crowen could get enough tribes on his side, he would have enormous political leverage when he finally met with Pontiac. That was the ultimate goal. There's no peace without Pontiac.
Native Americans would expect displays of sincerity, of trust, and an exchange of goods that represented the reciprocal relationships between both parties.
The British have only given Crowen 2,000 pounds to purchase gifts. Crowen knows this isn't nearly enough to bring about peace, so he reaches into his own pocket.
We purchased, some estimates say, as high as 30,000 British pounds worth of goods. Crone did so because he realized how peace had to be effected. He knew how native diplomacy was conducted.
Right then, mind you take care of the special merchandise.
Crowen rides ahead of his goods. Among them are some the British would not have approved.
One of the stories is that one of the barrels that was being carted west had cracked open, and there were all these scalping knives in it. Ammunition and scalping knives that show that the British trusted these native groups as partners.
The frontier settlers were appalled by the notion that the British Crown was sending weaponry to Native Americans in the region that had just unleashed terror during Pontiac's rebellion.
In the aftermath of the rebellion, a group of settlers band together to take matters into their own hands.
A rebel group of settler vigilantes, many Scots and Germans, had begun to chafe under British rule. They also objected to the provisioning of American Indians that included, to their mind, weapons that could be then used against the settlers.
And when the wagon train carrying those gifts starts moving westward, they're not going to stand for it.
Crowen's goods are intercepted before they can reach him.
Crowen needs these gifts to succeed in his mission. It just didn't happen.
So the vast majority was set alight. A few goods and commodities were not, including the rum.
One of Crowen's men manages to commandeer a horse released from the wagon and escape to warn Crowen. Meanwhile, Crowen is at Fort Pitt, anxiously waiting for his delivery. Crowen hears the devastating news that his goods have been destroyed, and now he knows there can be no peace negotiations. The tribes will feel betrayed, and the frontier could erupt in a new wave of bloodshed. George Crowen's peace mission is in danger of failure before it begins. He's struggling to scrape together gifts necessary to earn the trust of tribal leaders, to replace the ones destroyed by a rebel militia of white settlers. And those leaders are on their way.
The importance of presence in Native American treaties is a sign of respect.
The destruction of goods put the peace that he was trying to bring to North America in jeopardy.
The Ohio Valley tribes are running out of ammunition, but they'll only stop fighting if they get some respect. And this just isn't enough respect, is it?
Why is he beating?
Chinese! Go tell the commander they've come in peace. I hope. Hatito! Huh? Welcome to Fort Pitt, my friends.
Crowan always has a backup plan. It's one of his greatest attributes. And he's gonna have to call in favors to procure gifts to succeed in his mission.
But it will take more than Crowan's gift of gab to get the Shawnee to agree to a peaceful future.
I was bringing more. White men destroyed them.
With men like that, how can there ever be peace?
You know not all whites are like that. Elsewise you'd not have come. Let me have a word with the fort commander.
He needed to supplement lead and powder and went straight to the armory at Fort Pitt to make up for the shortfall in goods. Pretty bold maneuver.
There, huh? There. Tokens of good faith from the army itself.
The Shawnee leaders can't believe Crowan talked the English into giving them gunpowder.
I assured the commander you'd never use the gunpowder against him. That'd be like giving a gift back. Now, let's see what kind of peace we can build on gunpowder and rum.
George Crowan has turned potential disaster into victory, building a bridge of trust. Thanks to Crowan's quick thinking and deal-making, the Ohio Valley tribes agreed to peace and the restoration of trade.
He brought back the mission from the brink of disaster. They agreed to make peace. Score one for George Crowan. Phase one complete.
But phase one is the easy part.
There are still resistance pockets among indigenous populations throughout the Illinois and Ohio country.
Hundreds of miles to the west, other tribes still wage war, many following the leader of the uprising, Pontiac.
Crowan still needs to secure Chief Pontiac's signature on the peace treaty, but that's easier said than done. That is a dangerous task.
Now he had to go down the Ohio River and find Pontiac.
Crowan has no more gifts to give Pontiac if he finds him. He hopes the peace treaties in his pocket and Shawnee ambassadors traveling with him will give him political leverage. But Crowan is trying to negotiate with a man who has publicly called him out as a liar.
If Pontiac said no, that was game over. And Pontiac did not like him. What if finding Pontiac meant getting killed by Pontiac?
Hundreds of miles away, Pontiac himself faces opposition in his own ranks.
I will see Caskey now.
Pontiac may have started the war, but his ultimate goal is the same as Crowan's: peaceful coexistence between the native tribes and the British Empire.
But then there are others who believed that the British, no matter what, would always colonize and subjugate. And one of the leaders of this other faction was Charlotte Caskey. His father was German, his mother was Shawnee, and Caskey says there can be no chance for accommodation and peace.
Why am I summoned like a servant?
Why are you so proud? You came back from New Orleans with nothing from our French brothers.
Casquet has just returned from New Orleans, where he met with the French governor of Louisiana, asking for guns and ammunition support, fight against the British. But to his surprise, he's turned down.
They gave me gifts for you.
I need guns. Maybe you didn't know how to ask for that.
Perhaps the great Pontiac could have done better himself.
Enough. Maybe you can answer this. What should we do about Crowan? I have news that he comes here.
Should I fear that great Pontiac will listen to Crowan's lies? Don't worry. Crowan will never reach you. When the tribes up the river find an Englishman on their lands, they'll kill him, even if they don't know who he is.
Keep me informed.
As great Pontiac asks.
Caskey had virtually no trust in Pontiac or in his vision. He was adamant that they stop this peace treaty from happening.
A fine day indeed. Save me a cup.
But as Pontiac and Cascay's power struggle plays out, Crowan is unaware of the danger he is walking into.
Crowan didn't believe he was in any danger. The journey had been so pleasant, everyone had let down their guard.
George Crowan has come to make peace, but now he has been targeted for death.
A fine day indeed.
George Crowan is leading a mission to secure a peace treaty between the British and the powerful Ottawa chief Pontiac. But many in the Ohio Valley are uninterested in making peace with the British. These Kickapoo and Mascoutin warriors aren't following orders from Pontiac or his Shawnee rival, Charlotte Cascay.
It wouldn't be atypical for Kickapoo or Mascoutin warriors in the Ohio River Valley to attack a party that looked like Crowan's party at that time. The English are viewed very much as the enemy.
The attack on Crowan's camp seemed coordinated, but sometimes warriors just act on their own.
Several members killed, many injured. He himself sustains a tomahawk wound. It seems like things are really quite dire for Crowan and his mission.
But the warriors have stumbled into a situation that is far more complex than they realize.
What are you doing? Drop that tomahawk. How dare you do this? I'm the chief of the Shawnee. I have a mission of peace with that man. Fool! All the Ohio tribes will have revenge on your people.
At the words of the wounded Shawnee chief, the killing stops. Crowan's life is spared, for now.
So here is this group that attacked Crowan, who were probably unaware that Crowan had created a temporary truce, and they only learn of that after they've killed some Shawnees.
They're young warriors that made a miscalculated judgment and attacked a party that they didn't know the significance it held.
The warriors' mistake has made Crowan's peace mission even more complicated. Pontiac wants to force the British to make peace. Charlotte Cascay wants to continue the war. And the Kickapoo now have in their hands the one man who could decide the fate of the Ohio Valley.
So the question now is, what do we do with this guy?
The warriors let the Shawnee go, but they decide to take Crowan to their tribal leaders to decide his fate. A brutal forced march with little food or water.
Despite Crowan having a fancy townhouse in Philadelphia, he really was someone who could be quite tough. Fur traders really had to learn to be comfortable with the uncomfortable.
The man who dreamed of riches and easy living now thinks only of survival.
It's hard to estimate just how strong-willed of a personality and physically Croghan must have been.
Every step takes George Crowan farther from Pontiac and his mission. But the blow to his head may finish him first.
The wound that Crowan suffered was grievous, but his options were very limited. You can stop and wait and likely die in place, or you can keep going.
Peace on the frontier depends on the survival of one man, a man whose time may have run out. Wounded during an attack, George Crowan's hopes of a successful peace mission seem over. He's being marched by rogue Kickapoo warriors to face their chiefs. And yet, there may still be a slim ray of hope for Crowan.
Very kind.
The Kickapoo killed 2 Shawnee chiefs when they kidnapped Crowan, and they know those deaths will not go unanswered.
Could I trouble you for some water? No!
The threat to the Kickapoo is Shawnee retaliation. They could have a war on their hands. So this is a situation that calls for strategy.
Crowan realizes that his survival depends on convincing the Kickapoo that he is their only hope for getting out of this situation alive.
Much obliged, I'm sure.
Crowan had to get this just right. Be patient, keep your thoughts to yourself, play the long game.
He was quite capable of talking his way out of really difficult spots.
The Kickapoo marched Crowan more than 200 miles from the site of his ambush, stopping to rest near Fort Weodanon. Knowing a British fort is nearby, Crowan opens negotiations. He presses his only advantage, the warriors' fear of reprisal by other tribes for their impulsive attack.
Thank you.
They ended up killing at least 2 or 3 of the Shawnee chiefs that accompanied Crowan, and Crowan would have leveraged his position to gain the best outcome for himself.
I know you're worried about what the Shawnee chief said. A tribal war is a fearful thing. But you also know I can help. That's why you've been good to me.
Crowan is essentially trying to talk his way to freedom. And the plan actually begins to make sense to his captors.
I can take her side. Say you and your friend just made a mistake. If I'm alive. No, there's a fort just over that way. You take me inside the gate, and I'll tell the soldiers we're all friends. How's that sound?
When his Indian attackers realize that Crowan promises his intercession with the Shawnee, he's already sort of turned them around.
But just when freedom seems within reach, a hidden enemy makes his move. By kidnapping Crowan, the Kickapoo warriors have stumbled into the political struggle between Ottawa Chief Pontiac and the Shawnee Chief Charlotte Casquet. Now, news of Crowan's capture has reached Casquet, and Crowan's captors, fearful of the infamous chief, heed his call.
I am Charlotte Casquet. You've heard of me, and you will listen now. You will not take Crowan to your elders or to Pontiac. You will bring Crowan to me now. And as the whites have burned our villages, so I will burn him till only his heart remains. And all the tribes will know of this.
Killing Crowan would demonstrate his defiance of Pontiac and convince the warring tribes that he should be the one to lead them.
You're in this competition between Casquet and Pontiac. If you bring him to Pontiac, you don't quite know what the result's going to be. Bringing him to Casquet would be a dramatic act.
Well, it's good to see my friends again.
George Crowan knows his fate has been decided. There are only two roads left to him: freedom or death. Captured during a mission of peace, George Crowan has almost convinced his captors to set him free.
Well, it's good to see my friends again.
But they've been ordered by Charlotte Casquet to hand Crowan over to be killed. Instead, the Kickapoo decide it's in their best interest to set Crowan free and accept his offer to square things with the Shawnee.
On to the fort, then.
It's a quintessential George Crowan story. Only he could be tomahawked, detained, and end up friends with those Indians by the time they got where they're going.
Crowan's liberation is a humiliation for Charlotte Casquet.
Were you going to burn Crowan with this fire? It's too little, like you. But how can you command the tribes when you can't even command two warriors with the minds of dogs? Your authority is broken. Whether Crowan lives or dies will be my decision.
Pontiac asserts his authority over Casquet. Casquet has lost this important confrontation.
To defy Pontiac would be a costly decision. So he takes his loss and lives to fight another day. As he promised, Crowan agrees to make peace between the Shawnee and his former captors.
I told you the commander was a good host, didn't I? A generous man with his food and his drink. Now then, about where we might be able to find Chief Pontiac.
George Crowan. And his dogs.
But it's Pontiac who finds Crowan.
Well now, I've been looking all over for you. Even got a tomahawk in the head for me troubles. But as you see, there are advantages to having a thick skull.
You have courage.
I've also got news from the tribes of the Ohio Valley, if Chief Pontiac would care to hear it.
By the time Crowan meets Pontiac, Pontiac's well aware of the precarious situation he would face if he continued to fight the British Crown.
Your battles with the English have forced them to respect you. They know you're a great chief. Great enough to make peace.
I think you want peace, so you can get rich, and there's trade again.
And what's wrong with that? We can all be rich and alive.
The offer that George Crowan brought to Pontiac was an economic one. The British had the things that the Indian economy needed to survive. For Pontiac, the New World was going to be a British world, and he believed that offered the best deal to his people.
Finally, the promise made between two fiercely independent men becomes a treaty between two nations.
What I think Pontiac sees is an opportunity to establish a foundation for a future. I do believe this was a moment of hope for Pontiac.
It is a decisive moment for George Crowan as well. The man who came to these shores seeking riches is now shaping the future of a nation.
George Crowan was able to operate among the most elite in North America, but he could also operate with the average frontiersman. And then, of course, he was extremely adept at navigating different Native American cultures. What made Crowan so successful was his ability to cross so many of these boundaries.
Crowan really stood at the precipice of establishing himself as one of the lead historical figures from colonial America. He led people into a vision of the future that had yet to be determined.
George Crowan led one of the most adventurous lives and brokered so many deals. And you can't really tell the story of westward expansion in the Ohio country without centering the story on George Crowan.